All right, everybody, welcome to another deep dive. Today, we're going to be looking at something pretty fundamental.
Fundamental is right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're looking at nitrogen. And
Right.
I've got some notes here that are for like a 5-minute podcast.
Uh-huh.
And I think even just in those notes, you can see how much there is to unpack with nitrogen.
Absolutely.
It's a lot more than you might think.
It's way more interesting, I think, than people give it credit for.
Yeah.
You know?
For sure. For sure.
Most people, when they think about nitrogen, they think about fertilizer or something.
Right. Or just like air, right?
Yeah, just air.
78% of the air.
Yeah, 78% of the air we breathe is nitrogen gas.
Yeah. And so
yeah,
what's
yeah.
interesting to me is how much of a paradox it is, right? Like
yeah.
it's everywhere and yet
It's everywhere, and yet we can't get at it.
yeah,
It's the ultimate irony.
it's a limiting factor for life.
It's a limiting factor for
Yeah.
life. Because you think about it, I mean, think about DNA. Proteins, amino acids, all these like building blocks of life require nitrogen.
Right.
But most organisms can't use the nitrogen gas that's just floating around in the air.
Right.
It has to be transformed or fixed into a usable form.
Okay. So it needs to be fixed.
Yeah.
So how does that work?
Well, in nature, this happens primarily through a process called nitrogen fixation.
Okay.
And there are certain types of bacteria and archaea.
Oh.
These are microorganisms
Okay.
that have the amazing ability to convert atmospheric nitrogen gas into ammonia.
So these are like our little nitrogen hero.
They're the unsung heroes of the nitrogen cycle.
Wow. So they take her from the air and then
And they transform it, they fix it into a form that plants can then take up and use.
Okay. So that's how it works in nature.
That's right.
So then why is there so much intervention, like human intervention with nitrogen, like with fertilizer and things like that?
Well, you hit the nail on the head there, the human intervention part.
Yeah.
So as the human population exploded, over the last couple of centuries, so did our demand for food.
Right.
And the natural nitrogen cycle, it just couldn't keep up
Right.
with the needs of intensive agriculture.
Right.
So to boost crop yields, we started producing synthetic nitrogen fertilizers on a massive scale.
Okay.
And this allowed us to really increase food production dramatically.
So it was a solution
Yeah.
born out of necessity.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So then what's the problem with that?
Well, the problem is that it's kind of like, you know how a little bit of a vitamin is good for you,
Right.
but too much can be toxic?
Yeah.
It's the same idea with nitrogen.
Okay.
When we add too much nitrogen to the environment, primarily through these fertilizers,
Yeah.
it can have a bunch of negative consequences.
All kinds of things.
Well, for starters, when excess nitrogen runs off from fields into rivers and lakes, it can cause something called eutrophication.
Okay.
And this basically means it fuels the excessive growth of algae.
Like algal blooms.
Exactly, like algal
And those
blooms.
are bad because,
Well, they're bad because they can block sunlight, deplete oxygen in the water, and even release toxins.
so it's like we're overloading the system.
Exactly. We're overloading the system with something that's supposed to be beneficial in smaller doses.
Okay. Okay. So what about the nitrogen that gets into our drinking water?
Right. That's another major concern. High levels of nitrogen in drinking water, particularly in the form of nitrates,
Okay.
can pose health risks, especially for infants.
Okay. How so?
Well, nitrates can interfere with the blood's ability to carry oxygen, which can lead to a condition called blue baby syndrome.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's a pretty serious issue.
So all of this is sounding pretty bad,
Yeah,
pretty negative. So
it's definitely a challenge.
what can we do about it? What are some of the solutions?
Well, the good news is that it's not all doom and gloom.
Okay.
There's a lot of research and innovation happening to find ways to manage nitrogen more sustainably.
Okay. Like what?
Well, for example, scientists are developing crops that are more efficient at using nitrogen, so they need less fertilizer in the first place.
Right. So if they're more efficient.
Exactly.
Less waste.
Less waste, less runoff, less pollution.
So it sounds like it's all about finding that balance.
I think that's a great way to put it. It's about finding that balance between utilizing nitrogen for our needs while respecting its power and potential downsides.
Absolutely. And I think that kind of leads into the next question, which is what can we as individuals do
Yeah.
to kind of promote that balance and help manage nitrogen responsibly?
That's a great question, and it's something I think we all need to be thinking about.
Yeah.
Because even small actions can add up,
Right.
and it's about, being mindful of how we use nitrogen in our own lives, whether it's through the food we eat,
Right.
the products we buy, or even just advocating for policies that promote sustainable nitrogen management.
Yeah. So it's like a collective effort.
Absolutely. It's
Yeah.
a collective effort, and it's a challenge, but it's one that we can overcome.
Yeah. Well, that's a great place to leave it, I
Yeah.
think. So thank you so much for all that information.
Yeah, no problem. It was a pleasure talking about nitrogen with you.
Always a pleasure to dive into this stuff with you. And yeah, we'll see you next time for another deep dive.
Sounds good.
Thanks, everybody, for listening.
Bye.